Professor BAJORATH, well, he's a professor at the University of Bonn and director of the life science informatics, life science information in Bonn, and also he's head of the chair of AI in life science at the Lamar Institute for Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence in Bonn. So Professor BAJORATH made outstanding contributions to similarity analysis, fingerprinting, virtual screening, and chemical space visualization. You may know a big chapter which he actually explored chemical space networks. Okay, and last but not least, Jürgen helped a lot in organization of this school because we successfully applied for the big grant of German-French University. And thanks to this grant, we can organize the school in good conditions. So now, please, Fanny, we'll show the video.
I will discuss language models for molecular design. One of the reasons for the popularity of chemical language models is certainly their versatility. As long as we can tokenize textual input data, a variety of mappings can be learned and translated into corresponding molecular design tasks. And this certainly provides a basis for tackling new types of applications in drug design. So regardless of the particular chemical language models or CLMs that we use, they all share learning tasks. They need to learn vocabulary and syntax of specific molecular representations, then derive conditional probabilities for positions of tokens and sequences. One can introduce what we call second-level conditioning using context-dependent rules, such as molecular property rules and constraints. And such models are often referred to then as conditional chemical language models. Model derivation often, but not always, includes pre-training and fine-tuning. Pre-training typically carried out on large sets of compounds to learn the syntax, fine-tuning then on smaller sets with desired implicit properties, and this would then correspond to semantic features. As far as the architectures are concerned, the original types of deep neural networks from language processing that were adapted are, of course, recurrent neural networks, in particular long short-term memory cells. And these LSTM RNN modules can be used in a variety of encoder-decoder frameworks, such as the variational autoencoder. Importantly, these RNNs and corresponding VAEs might include attention layers that convey attention mechanisms operating on all hidden states in the model and then assigning importance weights, attention weights to individual tokens. This has been a significant step forward since multiple attention functions can be used in parallel to reduce error rates when vectorizing the input data and also enable parallel processing. Attention mechanisms then bridge directly to the currently most popular form of language models, and these are the transformers, as you undoubtedly know, and they are deprived of any RNN components and consists only of multiple self-attention layers, all of which are multi-head attention layers with multiple attention functions. And these transformers are typically also used as encoder-decoder frameworks. There are a number of transformer variants. I want to mention 3 here, given their importance in different areas. There is, first of all, the typical transformer encoder-decoder architecture that we just looked at, natural language processing, NLP. These are referred to as text-to-text transfer transformers, or T5 in short. Then there is a transformer decoder-only variant. So we only have a decoder architecture, not an encoder. And these are the generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT, that we, of course, are familiar with from ChatGPT and other models, and they're mostly used for text generation, while the T5 architecture was originally used, as mentioned here, for translation and then also sequence-to-sequence mapping. And then there is a transformer encoder variant, bidirectional encoder representations from transformers, or short BERT. And this was originally conceived for text classification and also next sentence prediction, so not for the generation of new text. And this is an architecture that has been adopted both in bioinformatics and also in molecular design for a variety of different tasks. I will get back to this a little later. So let's start out with discussing one series of models that we have developed over the past 2 to 3 years. It was a T5 transformer that we developed originally for predicting activity cliffs. And specifically, activity cliffs here defined as pairs of structural analogs, matched molecular pairs, with greater than 100-fold difference in potency between the participating compounds. And the original development of this model, which we call DeepAC, was inspired by the ability not only to predict or reproduce activity cliffs, but also sample new candidate compounds for activity cliff formation, in particular potent compounds. And when we compared this model with other state-of-the-art machine learning methods, we certainly met the accuracy of predictions that we and others have carried out with standard machine learning methods such as SVM or original predictions, reaching about 85% prediction accuracy, in this particular case, reproduction accuracy of activity cliffs. But then, in addition, also with a transformer having the ability to predict new potent candidate compounds. In other words, initial proof of principle that this was possible, we sought to generalize this approach, generalize activity cliff prediction in order to design potent compounds on the basis of weakly potent input molecules. So the basic idea of what we call DeepAC 2.0 was outside of the activity cliff formalism to start from weakly potent input compounds and then use them to design potent molecules. And for this learning task, then for this prediction task, we needed to learn mapping of source to target compounds conditioned on a context-dependent rule, in this particular case, potency differences. Well, this is indicated here. So our input instance is always a weakly potent source compound, and then a desired potency difference, and then a target compound, the desired output, that is supposed to have this particular potency difference compared to our source compound. So in space sense, this is a concatenated string representation of the source compound and then a tokenized potency difference bin, and use as input and to predict new potent compounds. We trained the model on analog pairs with multiple substitution sites going beyond the MMP formalism and varying potency differences. So we started out with a minimum potency difference of 10-fold, and then it was open-end for higher potency differences. The transformer was pre-trained on about 500,000 analog pairs for about 500 different activity classes. And then fine-tuning step was applied on individual activity classes comprising between 7,000 and 34,000 analog pairs. And these classes, of course, were not included in pre-training of the model, and then predictions were carried out on separate holdout or test sets. Each case, 50 compounds were sampled, and then an important point for model assessment in generative design is, of course, that the most rigorous approach to assess the ability of a model to predict desired compounds is exact reproduction of known target compounds. This is a priori a difficult task because we sample relatively large chemical space, but we look for exact reproduction of known target or test compounds. We systematically assessed DeepAC 2.0 and found that the model correctly reproduced, depending on the activity class, between 7 and 36% of known target compounds, spanning a large potency difference range. Also, all of these target compounds then had between 10 and 1,000-fold higher potency than the input compounds. An important observation when assessing the results was the ability of the transformer model to diversify input structures, although, as I mentioned, the transformer was originally trained exclusively on analog pairs. So analog pairs having the same core structure. However, the correctly reproduced, fully reproduced target compounds included both structural analogs and also compounds with novel cores. This is shown here, viewing some exemplary predictions. We have here on the left always the input compound and its potency, and then here correctly reproduced target compounds. Here we have analog relationships, the distinguishing substituents are highlighted. And in addition to those, then we have instances where from given input compounds, new scaffolds were predicted, in addition to substitutions, and illustrating the ability of these models to structurally diversify, although they were trained, as I said, exclusively on analog pairs. So observation for us that was relatively compelling, enabling the application of the model under various training conditions and modifications, as you may imagine. The second chemical language model that we developed was specifically designed for extending active analog series with potent compounds. So here the theme is also to predict potent compounds, but now in a little different fashion within the context of given analog series. And the specialty of this approach that we originally termed deep analog series or deep AS was by design scaffold independent compound optimization. Now, scaffold independent compound optimization sounds, in fact, a little bit off the beaten path, of course, no? Because there is essentially no approach that we have ever been using for compound design that is truly scaffold independent. And the rationale for attempting this will be presented a little later. But the basic idea, or one of the basic ideas of the deep AS approach, was to, in fact, tackle a really off the beaten path design approach. Since analog series have invariant core structures, they can be represented as R-group sequences. And what we do here with given analog series, input analog series, we order them by increasing potency. And as such, when we do this, each analog series then represents an ascending potency gradient. And if we use the R-group sequences from these analog series as input, then, important point, the probability that the model should hopefully learn should implicitly capture potency increases. It's a semantic feature. And this in a scaffold-independent manner. For the original design approach, in order to establish proof of principle, a relatively simple model was implemented, essentially a basic LSTM-RNN model with only 3 layers, including LSTM layer, batch normalization, and dense layer, that then through softmax produced output probabilities. That we attempted to develop a general model. So a model that would not be used to fine-tune on specific activity classes or ensembles of analog series for reasons that we will discuss a little later. So this general model should be capable as another, off the beaten path, maybe even a little bit provocative design task, then to predict potent analogs for different analog series, regardless of their scaffolds and also regardless of their targets. So if we like to view this in a little bit provocative way, the design criteria get increasingly wired, let's say. So general model without scaffold and target information. And what we would like to obtain are generalized conditional probabilities for extension of R-group sequences. For this model, we required a specific training data structure. So our potency ordered R-group sequences from analog series are represented as sentences of constant length, in this particular case 35 tokens, including the terminal label token to be predicted. At the end of the day, our vocabulary here consists of 3,852 R groups that were systematically extracted from bioactive compounds, and then some special tokens that we need for encoding. Importantly, also here, we implemented a data augmentation approach as indicated here. Each analog series and corresponding R group sequences is transformed into multiple sentences with at least 2, 3, and then n words, and the final label to be predicted, which for complete analog series would be the stop label. And with this data structure, we trained the model, as said before, on a large number of R groups and a large number of analog series, and then carried out systematic predictions on about 10,000 analog series that were not included in the training process. And this model can, by design, be applied for two prediction tasks, now related yet distinct prediction tasks. We can either predict for any given analog series the next R group, and as an alternative, we can also carry out, as indicated here, iterative predictions where new R groups are predicted in subsequent step until we reach the stop coda. For establishing proof of principles, we use the former predictions. So from all the test analog series, we omitted the last R group and then try to repredict these on the basis of all 3,855 tokens that were ranked based on the model's log likelihood scores derived from the original conditional probabilities. Quite surprisingly, in this case, for nearly 60% of all of these analog series, the final R group was correctly repredicted within the top 5 of all of the 3,800 some tokens, establishing proof of principle for this particular approach. This initial finding that the scaffold and target independent optimization was feasible then encouraged us to compare and further extend the methodology using another architecture. And of course, in this particular case, we looked at a transformer. And here, the transformer variant that was chosen was BERT, because this next sentence prediction, one of the 2' applications for which BERT was originally conceived, is of course closely related to the analog series extension tasks. And the intrinsic design advantage of BERT compared to other chemical language models, particularly our RNN-based model that we originally tested, is of course the bidirectional design approach. In BERT, each word in a sentence is not only predicted based on the preceding, but also on the following words. This adds another layer of information content to the design. Different from the original model, we also wanted to explore a fine-tuning option here, implemented this, and then as a major scientific, in addition to the methodological comparison, as a major scientific extension of the approach, we wanted to apply it not only to analog series with single substitution site, but also multiple substitution sites, which, as you will see, then increases the complexity of the design approach. This is the DeepAS, an outline of the DeepAS 2.0 model architecture, where we have our embedding tokenization here. Then we have our transformer encoder layer. So this is core BERT. And then we have a dense layer where we calculate the log likelihood scores from the conditional probabilities. And then we can, on the basis of probabilities or log likelihood scores, rank all the different tokens that we like to predict. So the first application here was to carry out a direct comparison between the base LSTM RNN model and then BERT, which should in principle be much superior in this case. So we exactly reproduced the approach shown before. So we trained the models again on the about 94,000 amino acids with single substitution sites covering 2,000 different targets. And then also the goal was to derive general models in the first place, tested again on the same set of analog series excluded from training, spanning the same target space, and then repeated the terminal R group predictions. On the training set, the prediction accuracy was comparably high for both models. And on the test set, as reported before, for the LSTM RNN base model, we had about 57% success rate of R groups ranked among the top 5 candidates. And with BERT, then we further increased this by about 12%. And this is a significant increase in performance. However, when we consider the substantial difference in model complexity between the RNN base model and then BERT, the differences is maybe not as large as one might expect. Different way to view this, of course, that the base basic RNN model here already reached a relatively high level of prediction accuracy. As also mentioned, for BERT, we implemented a fine-tuning option and then tested this approach on 10 activity classes, complete activity classes that were excluded from training. In this particular case, we also used analog series with single substitution sites, retrained the base models, this particular case, and then carried out general predictions for both models and compared this then with fine-tuning for BERT. Our test analog series here per activity class were on the order of 400 to 1,000 analog series that were then for BERT divided into equally sized fine-tuning and training sets without any data leakage. And as we can see here in this particular case on these activity classes, with the base model, we are close to about 50% reproduction rate within the top 5 candidates. With BERT, we're about 8% higher. And in this particular case, fine-tuning then increased the performance by another 10%. Also clearly demonstrating the sensitivity of the model to compound class specific features, but also not dramatically exceeding, as shown before, the performance of the generalized model. The major scientific challenge for DeepAS 2.0 was then the extension of the model for targeting analog series with multiple substitution sites. So here we needed to make a variety of extensions looking at the combinatorial tasks at hand. Again, we used the analog series to derive potency ordered sequences, but now not of individual R group, but of R group combinations. And for this purpose, we algorithmically, with one of our in-house approaches, algorithmically indexed all the different substitution sites. And then each index site might contain either a hydrogen or non-hydrogen substituent. A new token, X token, was introduced to indicate the absence of a substitution site. And then importantly, each R group combination provided by a particular analog was then encoded as a concatenated single token, such that each of these combination tokens represented a unique R group pattern, so combination. We needed to extend, of course, the length of our encoded sentences here to 256 tokens, and then data augmentation with iteratively increasing sentences was carried out just analogously to single-site AS. So in this particular case, our vocabulary consisted of 36,647 R group combinations, label tokens that were extracted from analog series with multiple substitution sites in Campbell, and then our additional specialized token. This is how the data structure looks like for each analog series potency ordered. We have 4 different analogs shown here, these examples, in series with maximum of 2, 3, or 4 substitution sites that can be variably substituted. And in this particular case, each row defines an analog and the corresponding combination of R groups that are then potency ordered. We trained this Deep AS 2.0 model also on close to 11,000 analog series with 1 to 5 different substitution sites, activity against about 850 targets as a general model. The model was then tested on about 2,700 analog series not included in training, and the terminal R group combination was predicted. So now we're having a much more complex prediction tasks where we look at different R group combinations and the probability to extend an analog series. Here were the results now reported not only for the top 5, also top 10 rank combinations. And for the training set, reach about 60 to 70% accuracy. And then for the test set, on the top 5 and top 10 candidates up to about 50% accuracy, which initially surprised me a great deal, because when we evaluated this model looking at the complexity of the task, I did not envision or expect that it might in fact yield such a promising success rate in these predictions. A couple of exemplary predictions are shown here for analog series, for different analog series, where the terminal R group combination is predicted here on the basis of only 3 analogs, here on the basis of 4 analogs, and the ranks here on the basis of the log likelihood scores for these compounds then are also shown. So the deep AS methodology as scaffold independent, and then also we do not consider fine-tuning target independent approach, works. The models produce sound predictions, promising predictions. And this is a very good example where the success of these models, in fact, depends on some clear-cut scientific foundations, which need to be taken into consideration, because otherwise the approach could not possibly work. If we contemplate on the scaffold independent and also specific activity independent approach for the prediction of potent analogs, a prerequisite, basic condition for this is that potency progression of analog series as a consequence of given R group or R group combinations must be transferable across many different compound classes and targets. Otherwise, these predictions would not possibly be feasible, given that we do not include core structure and target information in the general models. If this is the case, then we must be able to find what we have termed a number of years ago already SAR transfer series or SATRAs. This would be analog series with different core structures that have corresponding pairs of R groups and also represent ascending potency gradients. And these pairwise corresponding R group sequences and different analog series would then, in fact, represent individual SAR transfer events that are then exemplified by the SATRAs. And we can systematically search for such SAR transfer events if we adapt methodology from the alignment of biological sequences. Search for these type of alignments of analog series. For this, we need a similarity matrix for R groups as one of the basic requirements. And this was one that we derived on the basis of selected numerical and also fragment type of descriptors. And then we can use this as a basic basis for conventional dynamic programming to search for and align candidate sequences with given input sequences. Since these alignments are short, we don't even need gap penalties. So it's a relatively simple and robust approach. And then for a given query analog series, we can, in fact, then look at all possible alignments that we identify in databases. Specifically, we would search for compounds that contain, for analog series that contain more compounds than the query, but also follow an ascending potency gradient. And this would be then exemplary output. And if our target sequence is more analogs than our query sequence, then we can also, based on this much simpler data structure, try to predict these SAR transfer analogs, not to complement input series. And when we do this systematically, we find that we can, in fact, detect SAR transfer events and SATRAs quite frequently. So, for example, for a sample of 100 randomly selected analog series in Camber, at least 5 analogs, 80 targets, and we identified more than 400 SATRAs in this particular case with high alignment scores with activity against 253 targets. So this is, of course, the scientific foundation that essentially enables us to do then scaffold-independent analog predictions in a more sophisticated manner with chemical language models. As I said, we can predict from these alignments SAR transfer analogs. These are also interesting applications that are very intuitive when we compare the different analog series. So I'll show here one SAR transfer event with 2 very different targets. Many of those, as I said, are available, and then one can contemplate on the prediction, attempted prediction of individual SAR transfer analogs. This is a practical example. Here, one of the practical examples that we carried out with collaborating groups. This particular case, a matrix metalloproteinase 1 inhibitor was designed on the basis of SATRA. In this particular case, it was difficult to find meaningful alignments because only 4 analogs were available. Experimental analogs, MMP1 analogs. When we did this, nonetheless, with this series, 3 different compounds were suggested and made, and including a nanomolar inhibitor. So from very little input information, even here it was possible to do this. And many SATRAs that have many more analogs available and can be used for these types of predictions, which then, through the DBAS approach, are generalized and exploited in a much more differentiated way. So with this, I want to leave you with some conclusions here. The versatility of CLMs in learning different types of mappings and corresponding design tasks is really providing us with new opportunities, difficult to do with standard methods in part or even impossible. And the 2 examples, DeepAC and DeepAS 2.0 that I've shown here, represent new concepts for the prediction of potent compounds using generative design, generalized predictions, and analog series-based predictions. The scaffold-independent predictions exploit SAR transfer information, as demonstrated Without this, the predictions, regardless of the sophistication of the model, would not be feasible. And these SATRAs, as introduced, then identify individual SAR transfer events and enable intuitive prediction of single analogs as well. Acknowledgements here of the people who have contributed most of the work here today. The practical application that I just showed you on MAP1 was carried out in Hiro Nakamura's lab at Tokyo Tech, with whom we have a long-standing collaboration. And last but not least, then I would also like to draw your attention to the Lamar conference that will be held in September this year. This is a major event for the national competence centers, AI national competence centers in Europe, as the beginning of a series of such events. And the Lamar conference will have a strong focus on AI interdisciplinary settings, including also the interface between academic and industrial research. So with this, I'm at the end, and please let me thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so